At the airport, a powerful black billionaire is publicly humiliated by a defiant flight attendant, his aura of invincibility shattered in a single, shocking moment. Stripped of his pride in a spectacle of disgrace, he finds himself propelled into a quest for truth amid a labyrinth of betrayal and hidden agendas. Witness how a devastating fall from grace sparks an unstoppable journey, where humiliation becomes the catalyst for exposing a far deeper conspiracy. Before diving into this gripping tale, let us know where you're watching from the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch more inspiring stories like this one. The airport was unusually quiet that early morning, the kind of quiet that carried secrets and whispered promises of change. Layla moved through the terminal with an effortless grace, her uniform crisp and her eyes alert yet calm, a mask she had perfected over years of service. Outside the great glass windows, the sky was a blend of pale blues and muted grays, hinting at the day's uncertainties. Every detail, from the muted hum of the boarding announcements to the soft scuffle of hurried footsteps, spoke of lives intersecting at this transient point. In one corner of the terminal, a private lounge exuded an air of exclusivity. There, among velvet chairs and polished surfaces, sat Darius. His presence was commanding, a quiet yet undeniable force. Dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of wealth and precision, he radiated confidence that bordered on arrogance. His deep-set eyes, a striking shade that echoed the midnight sky, were fixed on a tablet, seemingly dismissive of the world around him. Yet even as he appeared detached, his mind was already calculating the minutiae of every transaction, every gesture, a habit born from decades of power and privilege. Layla's path and Darius's domain were destined to cross. It began as a routine check. Layla had just finished a meticulous inspection of the boarding gate area when she noticed a small disturbance near the lounge entrance. A passenger, agitated and frustrated, was raising his voice in a low, heated murmur. Layla's training had taught her that even the slightest ripple in order demanded attention, and she moved with purposeful steps toward the commotion. As she approached, the noise grew louder, and the tension became almost palpable. A subtle exchange of words was underway, a conversation loaded with implications and unsaid judgments. Darius, who had been observing quietly, now looked up, his gaze meeting Layla's steady eyes. In that brief moment, something unspoken passed between them, a silent challenge wrapped in politeness and duty. Layla's heart pounded in a measured rhythm, yet her face remained an impeccable picture of calm. Internally, however, she was a storm of emotions. Memories of past encounters, personal sacrifices, and unyielding resolve flickered in her mind. She had long learned that appearances often mask deeper truths, that every gesture could carry layers of meaning. This was not just another day at work. It was the quiet prelude to a confrontation that would shake the very foundation of her carefully constructed world. The agitated passenger, whose voice had escalated from murmurs to a thinly veiled shout, demanded special treatment, a privilege he believed came with his wealth. The air seemed to hold its breath as he insisted on skipping the usual procedures, his tone laced with entitlement and a hint of menace. Layla stepped forward, her voice soft yet imbued with unyielding authority. "Sir, I must ask you to follow the standard protocol," she said, her words measured, each syllable deliberate. The passenger's eyes flashed with indignation, and for a fleeting second, his bravado faltered under the unwavering calm of Layla's gaze. Darius observed the scene with a detached curiosity, but even he could not help but be drawn into the unfolding drama. In his world, rules existed to be bent for those who wielded enough influence, and yet here was Layla, a guardian of order, standing firm against the tide of entitlement. It was as if fate had woven their paths together in a delicate dance of opposites, each representing a force that could either maintain equilibrium or shatter the delicate balance of power. As the confrontation deepened, Layla's inner thoughts churned with reflections of her past. She had once been a young woman full of hope, unburdened by the weight of hidden responsibilities. But life, with all its twists and betrayals, had taught her that strength often lay in embracing the shadows of one's history. There was an air of mystery about her that few could guess, a secret locked behind her piercing eyes and quiet demeanor. Today, that mystery was only hinted at, like a faint melody playing beneath the noise of everyday routine. The passenger's resistance grew, and soon his demands escalated into a challenge of her authority. "I demand to be treated with the respect my status commands," he insisted, his voice rising in anger. Layla's response was calm but unyielding. All passengers are subject to the same rules, regardless of their status. Her words cut through the clamor like a blade, leaving an uncomfortable silence in their wake. Even as the passenger fumed, those around him began to exchange uneasy glances, sensing that the balance of power was shifting. It was in this charged moment that Darius leaned forward, his interest now fully piqued. His eyes, dark and thoughtful, observed the interplay of power and defiance. He had built his empire on the belief that money and influence could smooth over any rough edge, but the scene before him was a stark reminder that sometimes principles held more weight than wealth. There was something about Layla's unwavering resolve that stirred a deep, unexpected respect in him, even if he could not yet comprehend the full extent of what he was witnessing. As the standoff reached its peak, the subtle interplay of light and shadow in the terminal seemed to echo the internal conflict within Layla. Every ray of sunlight that filtered through the high windows painted her features with a soft glow, yet also highlighted the faint lines of worry and determination etched into her face. The terminal, with its mix of transient passengers and persistent echoes of announcements, became a stage for this quiet drama, a moment where the veneer of civility gave way to raw, unfiltered truth. Layla's calm exterior belied the intensity of her inner turmoil. She remembered long nights spent questioning the very nature of duty and honor, wrestling with choices that had defined her life. In those reflective moments, she had come to understand that sometimes the hardest battles were fought not on the physical plane, but within the recesses of one's own soul. Her heart was a tapestry of hope, regret, and relentless determination, a mosaic that no one could ever fully decipher from a mere glance. The passenger, now visibly frustrated, tried one last time to bend the rules. "You must understand, I am not like the rest of you," he insisted, his tone shifting to a mix of arrogance and desperation. Layla's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, the bustling noise of the terminal seemed to fade into a background hum. "In this place, there are no exceptions," she replied softly, her voice a quiet command that resonated with a deep-seated authority. Her words were more than a reminder of protocol. They were an assertion of fairness, a shield against the arrogance that threatened to upset the order. At that precise moment, as if on cue, a sudden announcement over the speakers cut through the tension, a reminder of a flight that was about to depart. The announcement was routine, yet in that instance, it carried the weight of destiny. The passengers shifted in their seats, some exchanging worried looks, others simply preparing for the journey ahead. Darius's gaze flickered between Layla and the discontented passenger, his mind already formulating impressions that would linger long after this encounter. In the charged silence that followed, Layla felt a quiet vindication. She knew that every action, every decision, was a piece of a much larger puzzle, one that she had been solving for years, sometimes at great personal cost. The seeds of mistrust had been sown today, not only between an entitled passenger and an unwavering flight attendant, but also in the unseen spaces where ambition and principle collided. Darius, in his quiet observation, felt the stirrings of an unexpected alliance, one that would eventually challenge his long-held beliefs about power, loyalty, and the true nature of identity. As Layla resumed her duties, her steps were measured, each movement deliberate. She moved among the passengers with a quiet efficiency that belied the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. There was a weight in her every gesture, a subtle reminder of the hidden battles she had fought and the secrets she carried. The terminal, a microcosm of the world's chaos, had become a crucible where trust and deception intermingled, setting the stage for events that would soon spiral into It was a strength that defied simple categorization, much like the complex interplay of power and vulnerability that defined his own life. And while the day's events had been wrapped in the ordinary guise of airport protocol, they were anything but ordinary in their implications. In the moments that followed, the air in the terminal grew heavier with unsaid questions and unvoiced judgments. Layla's actions had set off a chain reaction, a subtle ripple that hinted at deeper truths yet to be revealed. Her quiet defiance, her unwavering adherence to principles that transcended the superficial trappings of wealth and status, resonated in the silent spaces between each boarding call and every hushed conversation. For those who had witnessed the confrontation, it was a moment that defied simple explanation, a glimpse into a world where appearances were deceiving and every gesture carried the weight of unspoken history. Even as the crowd began to disperse, returning to their routines, Layla's mind remained alert to the hidden layers of meaning in every interaction. Each smile, each frown, each seemingly trivial comment was a thread in a vast tapestry of human connection and conflict. And somewhere in that intricate weave, the seeds of deception were taking root, promising that nothing would remain as it seemed. Darius, too, sensed that the encounter was but the opening act of a drama far larger than either had imagined, a drama where loyalties would be tested, betrayals would unfold, and the true nature of each character would be revealed only in time. In the fading light of the early morning, as the final passengers boarded the flight and the terminal began to empty, Layla paused for a moment near a large window overlooking the runway. She gazed at the planes waiting in silent anticipation, each one a vessel carrying dreams, hopes, and hidden fears. In that quiet moment of reflection, she allowed herself a brief respite, a silent acknowledgement of the burden she bore and the hidden truths that shaped her every decision. The cool air brushed against her skin, and for a heartbeat, she felt the weight of her past mingling with the promise of a future yet to be written. As she turned back to resume her duties, the memory of that charged confrontation lingered like a persistent echo in her mind. The encounter had been brief, yet its impact was profound, a reminder that in a world governed by appearances and pretense, the truth often lay hidden in plain sight. And in that truth, there was both danger and salvation, a duality that would continue to define her journey in the days to come. Unbeknownst to Layla, the seeds of mistrust and deception sown in that fleeting moment would grow into a tangled web of alliances and betrayals. Darius's quiet observation, his internal reckoning with the ideals he had long taken for granted, was only the first ripple in a cascade of events that would soon engulf them both. As the aircraft roared to life on the runway and the promise of flight beckoned, Layla carried with her a silent vow to remain true to herself, to honor the principles that guided her, no matter how deep the shadows that lay ahead. In that vast, echoing space of the airport, where every departure signified an ending and every arrival hinted at a new beginning, the quiet drama of the morning had set the stage for an unfolding saga of hidden identities and unexpected revelations. The clash between entitlement and duty, between wealth and wisdom, had only just begun, and its reverberations would soon challenge everything Darius and Layla believed about power, trust, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. And so, as the last light of dawn gave way to the steady pulse of the day, the journey of secrets and subtle deceptions continued, a journey that promised to unravel mysteries as delicate and dangerous as the first fragile light of morning. The terminal was growing busier as the morning progressed, the earlier calm now replaced by a low, steady hum of anticipation and hurried footsteps. Layla moved through the crowd with measured steps, her eyes scanning every detail as she continued her duties. Still, the encounter for moments before lingered in her mind, a quiet defiance that had set hearts racing and stirred hidden currents beneath the polished surface of routine. It was then that an unexpected call crackled softly in her earpiece, its tone urgent and unfamiliar. "Layla, please come to the operations office immediately," the voice on the other end instructed. The message was curt, leaving no room for delay. With a slight tightening of her jaw, Layla excused herself from her post and headed toward the restricted area near the back of the terminal. Every step she took felt heavier than the last, as if the simple act of moving was burdened by a secret she had long tried to forget. In the lounge, Darius's eyes narrowed as he watched the unfolding scene. He had already felt a peculiar unease earlier, a subtle shift in the air when Layla had spoken with unwavering authority. Now, as he saw Layla disappear behind a closed door, his curiosity, and something deeper, stirred within him. He rose from his seat with a deliberate grace, determined to uncover the mystery that lay beneath her composed exterior. Though his mind raced with questions, he maintained a calm facade, aware that any premature display of emotion might only add to the enigma. Back in the operations office, the space was dimly lit, a stark contrast to the bustling terminal beyond its heavy glass windows. Layla's supervisor, a stern-faced man named Mr. Kareem, sat behind a cluttered desk, his eyes fixed on a screen displaying a series of security feeds. He looked up as she entered, his voice low and controlled. "Layla, there's been an incident," he said, sliding a file across the desk. "We have received a complaint regarding the treatment of a VIP passenger." His tone was measured, but there was an unmistakable tension underlying his words. Layla's heart skipped a beat as she glanced at the file. The image on the document was unmistakable. Darius, the very man she had observed moments earlier, now cast in a light that seemed all too contradictory to her own understanding of the day's events. "A complaint," she repeated softly, her mind racing to reconcile the conflicting details. "But what exactly is the nature of this complaint?" Mr. Kareem leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "It appears that the VIP in question violated a certain protocol. We have reason to believe he was involved in a situation that endangered the safety and order of this terminal." His words were careful, laced with implications that went beyond a mere breach of etiquette. "We have instructions, Layla. You are to escort him from the premises immediately." For a heartbeat, the room fell silent. Layla's mind swirled with conflicting emotions. She had always taken pride in her duty, in the fairness with which she treated every passenger. Yet now, her very sense of duty was being called into question. Was it possible that the order was less about safety and more about something else? Something hidden beneath layers of protocol and bureaucracy? Her hands trembled slightly as she considered the implications. Outside the office, the terminal's atmosphere had shifted. Whispers spread among passengers as security personnel moved with renewed urgency. Darius, who had ventured toward the exit in search of answers about Layla's absence, now found himself at the center of an unfolding drama. His brow furrowed as he noticed a group of uniformed officers converging near the private lounge. The air seemed to crackle with tension as onlookers exchanged uncertain glances. Darius's mind, always alert to power plays and subtle signals, began piecing together the fragments of the situation. Inside the operations office, Layla stood silently, the weight of the decision pressing upon her. Her eyes flickered over the file once more, and she could almost feel the sting of betrayal, a feeling that had haunted her in quieter moments of reflection. The memory of a past injustice, long buried but never forgotten, surged beneath the surface. In that moment, every rule she had ever enforced and every compassionate smile she had offered seemed tainted by the potential for personal retribution. The idea that she might be used as a pawn in a larger game unsettled her deeply. She looked up at Mr. Kareem, her voice steady yet laced with quiet defiance. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her tone calm but resolute. "What happens then?" Mr. Kareem's eyes softened briefly before hardening again. "It's not a question of if, Layla. It's an order. We must maintain order, regardless of personal feelings or complications." There was an edge of finality in his words, a reminder that the system demanded compliance even when it conflicted with personal judgment. Outside, the situation reached a fever pitch. Darius, now standing in the center of a clearing near the terminal's exit, was approached by a security officer. The officer's posture was authoritative, his tone polite but firm. "Sir, I'm sorry, but you are required to leave the premises immediately." Darius's eyes flashed with a mixture of indignation and surprise. "I understand the rules, officer," he replied coolly, his voice measured despite the rising tension. "But surely you realize there is some mistake here." His gaze swept the terminal, searching for answers and perhaps a sign of where the error had begun. In that moment, the eyes of many passengers seemed to fix upon him, their expressions a blend of curiosity and concern. Meanwhile, Layla had left the operations office with the file clutched tightly in her hand. Every step toward the boarding gate was a battle between her ingrained sense of duty and the unresolved turmoil that threatened to overwhelm her. The weight of the order pressed upon her like an invisible hand, guiding her toward an inevitable confrontation with Darius, a confrontation that felt less like a routine enforcement of rules and more like a reckoning of hidden truths. As she approached the lounge area, the murmur of voices and the shuffle of anxious feet grew louder. Darius stood before a set of glass doors that led to the exclusive area, his posture both regal and defiant. Their eyes met briefly, his dark, thoughtful gaze locked onto hers, filled with a mix of surprise, hurt, and something deeper that Layla couldn't immediately decipher. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, the chaotic background fading into insignificance as the two silently acknowledged the gravity of what was about to unfold. "Mr. Darius," Layla began, her voice even yet laced with a hint of sorrow, "I have been instructed to ask you to leave this terminal immediately." Her words, though simple, carried the full force of the conflicting orders within her. She had long prided herself on treating every passenger with fairness, yet now she found herself standing at the crossroads of duty and a personal code that was suddenly under siege. Darius's eyes widened in disbelief. "Leave. I have done nothing wrong," he retorted, his tone both calm and assertive. "I am a paying passenger with every right to be here." His voice, normally resonant with the authority of a man accustomed to command, now carried a hint of vulnerability. The conflict was not simply about rules. It was about identity and the unspoken battles that each of them fought within. A subtle murmur rippled through the gathered crowd as the tension between them became palpable. Layla hesitated for only a heartbeat before replying, "The rules are clear, sir, and I have no choice but to follow them." There was an unmistakable tremor in her voice, a silent admission of the personal cost that came with this decision. It was as though every word she uttered was a small act of defiance against a past she wished to forget and a future she feared might repeat its mistakes. Darius's expression shifted, the initial shock giving way to a thoughtful calm. "I wonder," he said slowly, "if these rules are meant to protect us or to hide uncomfortable truths." His words, though softly spoken, carried an underlying challenge, a question aimed not just at Layla, but at the very system that now pitted them against each other. In that brief exchange, the seed of a deeper conflict was planted. It was a moment of truth where the established order was suddenly rendered brittle, susceptible to the influence of personal motives and hidden betrayals. Layla's eyes flickered momentarily as she absorbed his words. A pang of recognition passed through her, stirring memories of choices made in the quiet hours of solitude, choices that had left scars hidden beneath layers of professionalism. Before she could respond, her phone vibrated silently in her pocket. A message appeared on the screen, its text brief and cryptic. "They know the truth. Beware." The words sent a shiver down her spine, a sudden reminder that forces beyond her control were now at play. She quickly silenced the phone, her heart pounding in a rhythm that seemed to echo the approaching storm of events. The growing tension was now impossible to ignore. Around them, passengers watched with bated breath, and even the security officers exchanged uneasy glances. In the charged silence that followed, Mr. Kareem's earlier words echoed in Layla's mind, a reminder that order was paramount, no matter how personal the cost. But as she looked into Darius's eyes, she saw something that went far beyond the simple assertion of rights. There was a quiet intensity there, a plea for understanding that reached out to the parts of her long kept hidden. "Please, Mr. Darius," Layla said softly, her tone laced with reluctant determination, "I must do as I am told." Her eyes glistened with an emotion that she could neither fully explain nor completely hide, a mingling of regret, resolve, and an undercurrent of something more personal. "I'm sorry if this causes you harm, but I have orders." Darius's face hardened for a brief moment before softening once more, as if he was wrestling with the conflict inside himself. "And what if these orders are not as clear as they seem?" he challenged, his voice low and measured. "What if, by following them, you become part of a betrayal that was always meant to hurt someone like me?" His words, though quietly spoken, resonated with a depth that hinted at past wounds and hidden alliances. The question hung in the air, a silent accusation that neither could fully dismiss. At that very moment, a shadow moved near the entrance of the lounge, a figure whose presence was nearly missed amid the swirling emotions and shifting stares. The observer's face was partly hidden beneath a hood, and their eyes glinted with an intensity that promised further revelations. Though this stranger remained silent, the very act of watching added another layer to the growing web of mistrust and deception. It was a subtle reminder that every action, every choice, was being recorded by unseen eyes, and that the unfolding drama was part of a much larger design. Layla took a steadying breath, her inner turmoil now a palpable presence that seemed to echo through the terminal. In that moment, she was faced with a stark choice: to obey the order and risk compromising her own moral code, or to defy the command and allow her personal history to dictate her actions. The memory of old betrayals, moments when she had been forced to choose between duty and justice, flashed vividly in her mind. Her past whispered cautionary tales, urging her to remain steadfast even in the face of personal loss. Darius, noticing the conflict playing across Layla's face, stepped closer. "I ask you not just as a passenger, but as a man who has seen much injustice," he said, his tone softening as he reached out slightly, as if to bridge the chasm between them. "Do not let this order be the instrument of someone else's hidden agenda." His plea was earnest, laden with the weight of a lifetime spent navigating the treacherous waters of power and betrayal. In that single gesture, he revealed a vulnerability that was as unexpected as it was disarming. For several long moments, the space between duty and desire, order and rebellion, hung suspended in the charged air. Layla's eyes met Darius's once more, and in that silent exchange lay the spark of a dangerous understanding. The order was clear, yet her heart whispered that there might be more at stake than the enforcement of rules. The terminal, once a place of routine departures and arrivals, now served as a crucible for choices that would shape the paths of both their lives. A distant announcement over the intercom broke the silence, a call for final boarding on a scheduled flight that was now delayed due to the unfolding situation. The sound of the announcement only amplified the urgency of the moment. Layla felt the weight of the decision pressing on her shoulders, a burden that was both administrative and deeply personal. She glanced at the hooded figure in the background, then back to Darius, whose eyes had turned a shade of quiet imploration. "I cannot ignore these orders," Layla finally whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I promise you, Mr. Darius, that I will not let this become a tool for someone else's hidden revenge." Her words, though resolute, carried an unmistakable tremor of regret and fear of the consequences yet to come. Darius gave a slow nod, a subtle concession that his own pride was yielding to a greater need for understanding. "Then let us both tread carefully," he said, his tone both conciliatory and challenging. "For in every order, there may lie a secret, and in every secret, the potential for betrayal." As Layla turned toward the waiting security officer to begin the process of escorting him out, a final, unsettling thought passed through her mind. The cryptic message on her phone, the silent watcher in the lounge, and the undeniable spark of connection in Darius's gaze all hinted at a truth she had long tried to bury, a truth that would soon force her to confront the past in ways she had never imagined. With every step she took, The path ahead seemed fraught with danger and possibility in equal measure, a delicate balance of power that threatened to shatter the carefully constructed order of her world. Outside the terminal's grand entrance, the cool morning air embraced them as Layla and Darius moved slowly toward the waiting vehicle. The hum of distant engines and the murmur of anxious voices in the crowd provided a muted soundtrack to a scene that was anything but ordinary. Darius paused for a moment, glancing back at the terminal with a look that mingled regret, defiance, and a dawning realization that the woman before him was far more complex than a mere enforcer of rules. Layla, too, felt the pull of conflicting emotions. Every step away from the terminal felt like a step into an uncertain future, one where loyalty and betrayal were intertwined in ways she could barely comprehend. As the vehicle's door opened and she gestured for Darius to board, the hooded figure watched silently from afar, a silent witness to the inciting incident that had just upended the status quo. Their presence was a promise that the unfolding drama was far from over, that hidden motives and betrayals would soon come to light. In the confines of the waiting car, as it began to pull away from the terminal, the silence between them was thick with questions and unspoken revelations. Layla stared out the window, her thoughts a chaotic swirl of duty, regret, and the ever-present specter of her own hidden past. Darius, seated across from her, maintained his gaze on the receding building, as if hoping that the answers to his unasked questions might somehow be found within those walls. That morning, the simple act of enforcing a rule had evolved into a turning point, a choice that disrupted the very fabric of their lives. It was a moment when duty clashed with the personal, when the established order was challenged by the raw force of hidden histories and unspoken truths. And as the vehicle carried them away from the familiar confines of the terminal, both Layla and Darius were left with the lingering knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. The road ahead was uncertain, paved with the possibility of revelations and betrayals that lay hidden beneath layers of carefully maintained appearances. In that charged silence, each understood that the events of that morning were only the beginning of a far more intricate dance, a dance in which every step, every choice, will have consequences that might one day redefine their very identities. And so, as the cityscape unfolded before them, bathed in the soft light of a new day, both felt the weight of their choices and the foreboding promise of secrets yet to be unearthed. In the quiet hum of the vehicle's engine and the soft rustling of documents and unspoken memories, the inciting incident had set in motion a chain of events that neither could halt. The order to remove a single passenger, issued with cold precision, had become a catalyst for a deeper, more personal reckoning, one that would force them to confront not only the rules they had long upheld, but also the hidden wounds that time had failed to heal. With every mile that passed beneath them, the boundaries between right and wrong blurred further, leaving behind a trail of questions that would haunt them long after the day's light had faded into memory. The car's engine hummed steadily as it rolled along the quiet, early afternoon streets. The tension inside was almost tangible. Layla sat in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery, yet her mind was far away, replaying the morning's events over and over. Every detail, every exchanged look with Darius, had left an indelible mark on her soul. The city outside blurred into a muted watercolor of grays and blues, much like the feelings swirling within her. Darius, seated across from her, broke the silence with a soft, measured tone. "Layla, can I ask you something?" His voice was calm, yet carried an undercurrent of urgency that made her heart skip a beat. She turned her eyes toward him, meeting his dark, thoughtful gaze. "Of course, Mr. Darius," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. There was a hesitation in her tone, a reluctance to divulge parts of herself that were hidden even from those who now looked at her with newfound interest. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching hers as if trying to read a secret inscription on her soul. "Today, when you told me that there were no exceptions, it felt different. I couldn't help but wonder if you truly believe in those orders, or if there's something more behind them." His question wasn't accusatory. It was as though he was reaching out for an explanation of a shared mystery. Layla's mind raced. She had been trained to follow orders, to enforce rules without personal bias. Yet beneath that carefully constructed exterior lay layers of memories, regrets, and an identity she had long tried to bury. "I follow orders because it is my duty," she said, choosing her words with caution. But sometimes, duty can feel like a burden when it conflicts with one's own sense of justice. Darius's eyes softened at her words. "Justice is a rare commodity in our world," he murmured. "I have seen betrayal in places where loyalty was supposed to be absolute. Tell me, Layla, do you ever feel that you are more than what you appear to be? That perhaps there's a hidden part of you, one that the world isn't meant to see?" For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet purr of the engine and the soft tapping of raindrops beginning to fall against the windshield. Layla's heart pounded in her chest as she considered his words. She had spent so many years suppressing the truth of her past, a past filled with painful choices and betrayals that had scarred her deeply. "There was a time," she admitted slowly, "when I believed that I could change things. When I thought that by exposing the lies of those in power, I might be able to save a part of myself. But some truths, they are too dangerous to let surface." Her admission hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken meanings. Darius regarded her with a mixture of empathy and curiosity. "I once knew a woman who fought for what she believed in, even if it cost her everything," he said softly. "I can't help but feel that in you. I see that same fierce determination, even if it's hidden behind your duty." Layla's eyes flickered with something like regret, or perhaps longing. "Sometimes the price of truth is steep," she replied. "And sometimes those who claim to protect order use it to mask their own ambitions." Today's events at the terminal, they weren't just about following protocol. There was something else at work, a web of lies that many would prefer to keep hidden. A sudden vibration of her phone broke the intimacy of the moment. Layla glanced at the screen. A text message from an unknown number blinked into view. "Trust no one. The truth has been twisted from the start." Her stomach churned as she read those words. In that instant, the weight of betrayal pressed down on her shoulders, and she knew that her past was catching up with her. Darius noticed her sudden change in expression. "What is it?" he asked gently. Layla hesitated before replying. "A message. Someone is warning me that everything isn't as it seems. That perhaps I'm being used as a pawn." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and for a moment, she seemed lost in a world of shadows and half-remembered promises. The car slowed to stop at a red light, and as they waited, Darius continued, "I have my own suspicions. When I was escorted out of the terminal, there was an order that didn't make sense, an order that seemed less about safety and more about silencing me. I began to wonder if Mr. Kareem and those behind him had a hidden agenda. It's as if they wanted to rid themselves of someone who could uncover their secrets." Layla's fingers gripped the edge of the seat as she absorbed his words. "You think they orchestrated everything?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I was ordered to remove you, but I always knew that there was more to these orders. I've seen it before. How power can twist the truth to serve its own ends. I've been on the receiving end of such betrayal, and it left me with scars I still carry." Darius's gaze hardened with determination. "I want to believe that the world isn't all shadows and manipulation. But today every action, every whispered command, points to a conspiracy far beyond a simple breach of protocol." He paused, his voice dropping as he ventured closer to her hidden pain. "Layla, I sense that you have a history, a past that you haven't shared. Not because you wish to hide it, but because it has cost you dearly. I want to understand you, if you'll let me." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and for a long moment, silence enveloped them. Finally, she spoke, her voice laden with the weight of memory. "Before I became a flight attendant, I was part of an organization dedicated to exposing corruption at its highest levels. I believed in a cause, in fighting the injustices that fester in the shadows. But that world was built on lies, and betrayal was its currency. I was betrayed by those I trusted, and I lost everything I held dear. I swore never to be used as a tool for someone else's ambition again. The revelation struck Darius like a physical blow. "So you left that life behind?" he asked softly, his tone a mixture of sorrow and admiration. I never imagined that someone so courageous could have carried such a burden in silence. Layla managed a small, bitter smile. Courage sometimes means walking away, even when every step feels like a retreat. I chose the path of duty, of anonymity, to escape the endless cycle of betrayal. But it seems fate has a way of dragging you back into the darkness, no matter how far you run. Outside, the rain intensified, its rhythmic pattern on the roof of the car echoing the pounding of their hearts. The confessions hung in the air, both as a promise of truth and a warning of what was yet to come. In that vulnerable moment, Darius reached out, his hand brushing hers lightly, as if to offer solidarity. "Layla, I promise you, I will not let them use you. We are both caught in this web of lies, but together, perhaps we can untangle it." Her eyes met his, filled with a mixture of hope and resignation. "I want to believe that, Darius. I truly do. But the deeper I dig into this conspiracy, the more I fear that the betrayal runs deeper than I ever imagined." At that moment, as if in response to her fear, her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was even more cryptic. "The first lie is the deepest betrayal. Look closely at those you trust." Her heart sank as she realized the implications. Who could be behind these messages? And who among them had already played a role in deceiving her? Darius's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Could it be that Mr. Kareem has been manipulating events all along, he asked. That his order was never about safety, but about eliminating someone who might uncover his secrets. Layla's thoughts raced. She recalled subtle hints from earlier, glances that lingered too long, orders that seemed too curt, and a pervasive sense of being watched. "It is possible," she murmured. "I always suspected that the higher-ups had their own agendas. I trusted them once, but that trust has been shattered now. And it isn't just me. There are others in this organization who have been betrayed silently." A heavy silence fell over the car as the rain outside turned into a relentless downpour. Each drop on the window seemed to echo the patter of hidden truths and buried lies. Darius's voice broke the quiet once more. "I must confess something," he said, his tone low and cautious. "When I arrived at the terminal, I was not only shocked by the order to remove me, but I also found evidence that someone had tampered with the security protocols. It was as if my very presence was seen as a threat to an operation I never knew existed." Layla's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" she asked, leaning in closer. He hesitated before continuing. There were files, encrypted messages hidden within the system logs. "I managed to secure a copy before they noticed, and what I found, it suggests that my presence here today was no accident. Someone orchestrated this encounter, hoping to force us into a confrontation. And I fear that person might be someone you once trusted." Her mind reeled at his words. The idea that the encounter at the terminal was manipulated, a setup, filled her with dread. The voice of her past whispered warnings she had long tried to ignore. "Who would do such a thing?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the sound of the rain. Darius's eyes darkened with regret. "I suspect it might be linked to the same people who betrayed you in your old life. Those who once promised to fight injustice, but instead sold their souls for power. They might have seen me as a loose end, a threat to their carefully constructed facade." Layla's heart ached at the realization. The betrayal was not new. It was a familiar sting, a wound that had festered over the years. "I tried to leave that world behind," she whispered, "but it seems it has a way of finding me no matter where I go." The car came to a stop at a secluded parking lot near an old building that looked abandoned, yet hinted at secrets of its own. Darius and Layla exchanged a look laden with unspoken understanding. Here, away from prying eyes, they could finally confront the labyrinth of lies that had ensnared them. Inside the dimly lit building, the atmosphere was heavy with memories and the weight of unspoken confessions. They settled into a worn-out sofa in a small, private room that seemed untouched by time. The only light came from a single lamp on a rickety table, casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. Darius retrieved the encrypted files on a small tablet, his fingers trembling as he navigated through layers of coded messages. "I found a note hidden among these files," he said slowly. "It reads, 'The one who holds the truth has always been the most betrayed.'" His voice quivered with both fear and determination. Layla's eyes widened as she recognized the language, a code she had encountered in her past. "That language, it's from the old network," she whispered, her mind racing. "The network I once belonged to. I thought I had left that life behind for good." The revelation was like a sudden gust of wind, scattering the fragile remnants of her carefully constructed identity. For a moment, she was no longer the composed flight attendant enforcing orders. She was a woman who had once been deeply entangled in a dangerous game of espionage and deception. Darius looked at her intently. "Layla, what did you do in that life?" he asked softly, as if not to startle her further. Her eyes filled with tears as memories flooded back. Memories of late-night meetings, covert operations, and a betrayal so deep that it had forced her to reinvent herself. "I was an operative, working to expose corruption at the highest levels," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I believed in justice, but I was betrayed by the very people I trusted. They framed me, destroyed my reputation, and I had to disappear. I became someone else, someone untraceable." The confession hung between them like a fragile glass ornament, shimmering with both beauty and sorrow. Darius reached out, placing a comforting hand over hers. "You never deserved that betrayal," he murmured. "No one does. And if these people are behind what's happening now, we must stand together." As the night deepened, so did their conversation. They pored over the files, piece by piece, uncovering hints of a vast conspiracy that stretched far beyond the confines of the airport. Each decrypted message revealed layers of deceit, implicating powerful figures who manipulated events to serve their own ends. In one file, a name appeared repeatedly, a name that made Layla's heart sink. It was the name of someone she had once considered a mentor, a guiding light in a world gone mad. Could it be? She began hesitantly, unable to complete the thought. Darius looked over her shoulder, reading the name on the screen. "It seems so," he replied grimly. "This person was once close to you, wasn't he?" Layla's eyes glistened with a mixture of sorrow and anger. "Yes, he was," she said softly. "I trusted him implicitly, only to have that trust shattered in the most painful way possible. I believed he was on our side, fighting for justice. But in the end, he was only interested in power." The weight of that betrayal pressed down on her, mingling with the fear of what lay ahead. "I always wondered why I felt such an inexplicable pull to keep my past hidden, even from those who might understand. Now I see that it was because that past was full of scars, a web of lies spun by those I once loved." Darius squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Your past does not define you, Layla. What matters is what you do now, and how you choose to fight back against those who betrayed you." In that moment, a new determination sparked within her, a resolve to confront the demons of her past and expose the treachery that had ruined so many lives. The files and messages painted a grim picture of corruption and deceit, but they also held the promise of redemption. Each line of code, every encrypted note, was a piece of the puzzle that could lead to the downfall of those who thrived on betrayal. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the dusty windows, the shocking revelation that had emerged from the depths of encrypted files left them both reeling. The evidence pointed unmistakably to a grand collusion, one that involved not only the people at the airport, but also the very organization Layla had once served. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any she had experienced before. The realization that her old mentor had been orchestrating events from the shadows was almost too much to bear. "I can't believe it," Layla whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and despair. "He used everything I cared about against me. All those years, I believed he was fighting for the truth, and instead, he was weaving a web of lies that has ensnared us all. Darius's eyes filled with sympathy as he said, "That betrayal is unforgivable. But now that we know the truth, we have the power to act. We can expose this conspiracy, no matter how deep it runs." Her resolve hardened in that instant. "I won't let his treachery destroy any more lives," she vowed, her voice firm despite the pain in her heart. "If exposing him means I have to risk everything, then I will do it. I refuse to be a pawn in his game any longer." Darius nodded, his expression resolute. "Then we have no choice but to proceed carefully. Every step we take must be calculated, every move deliberate. They will not hesitate to silence us if they suspect we are onto them." For hours, they planned their next steps in hushed tones, aware that the web of lies they were unraveling was more dangerous than anything they had encountered before. The betrayal that had once defined Layla's past now fueled her determination to fight back, even as fear lurked in every shadow. In that dim, secluded room, amid whispered confessions and the soft glow of a single lamp, two souls united by pain and the desire for justice prepared to challenge a legacy of betrayal. The revelations of that night were both a curse and a call to arms, an invitation to expose the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried beneath layers of deceit. As the first rays of dawn broke through the gloom, the rain finally ceased, leaving behind a world washed clean yet stained with the secrets of the night. Layla and Darius emerged from their hideout, their eyes set on a horizon filled with uncertainty and the promise of reckoning. In that fragile moment of shared determination, they knew that the coming days would test their resolve, their loyalty, and ultimately, their very identities. But together, they had found a glimmer of hope, a chance to dismantle the web of lies and betrayals that had defined their lives for far too long. And so, with hearts heavy yet resolute, they stepped into the uncertain light of a new day, determined to unmask the villains of their past and reclaim the truth that had been so long obscured by deceit. The dilapidated warehouse was silent except for the persistent drip of water echoing off rusted metal and peeling walls. Layla and Darius sat tensely on a battered cot in a shadowed corner, their earlier resolve now giving way to uncertainty. The air was thick with unspoken questions when the hooded figure, whose presence they had both sensed before, stepped fully into the wavering circle of light cast by a single, swinging bulb. His arrival was as silent as a falling leaf, yet his presence carried an undeniable weight. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the hooded figure's gravelly voice broke the silence. "You both believe you understand the nature of betrayal," he said softly, his tone measured yet laden with secrets. "But sometimes, the truth hides behind the mask of an ally." Darius shifted uncomfortably, his dark eyes narrowing as he tried to place the man before them. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice cautious but steady. "What do you want?" The hooded figure paused, letting the question hang in the stale air. "I have come to reveal a truth that you both must face, a truth that will shatter the comfortable illusions you've built around yourselves." He slowly reached into the folds of his long, dark coat and withdrew a small, battered envelope. Inside this, you will find documents and recordings that speak of events long buried, of alliances forged in darkness, and of choices made that cannot be undone. Layla's heart pounded as she glanced between the hooded stranger and Darius. The tension in the room thickened as she felt a familiar sting of dread. "What are you talking about?" she demanded softly, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "What truth? What choices?" The hooded figure's eyes, cold and unyielding beneath his shadowed hood, locked onto hers. "The truth, Layla, is that the world you believe you know is built on lies. And one of the deepest lies of all is the one you have been told about loyalty and betrayal." He extended the envelope slowly, as if the act itself was laden with finality. "Open it, and you will see." With hesitant fingers, Layla accepted the envelope. The paper was worn, the edges frayed, and the ink inside had faded over time. As she unfolded its contents, Her eyes darted over typed memos, scanned images, and handwritten notes. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized names, dates, and, most shockingly, a series of transactions and communications implicating none other than Darius. Darius's face drained of color as he leaned forward, his earlier confident demeanor beginning to crumble. "That's impossible," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "It can't be true." Layla's voice wavered with disbelief. "Explain this, Darius," she said, holding up a faded photograph of a young man standing alongside someone whose face was unmistakably familiar from her hazy memories of betrayal. "This shows you with my former mentor, a man I once trusted, a man who ruined my life. You were together, conspiring over documents that detail the dismantling of my organization. How do you explain that?" The room seemed to shrink around them as the evidence, once obscured in shadows, now glowed in harsh, unforgiving light. Darius's eyes darted to the documents, then back to Layla, filled with a pained mixture of remorse and defiance. "Layla, you have to understand," he began, his voice tight. "I was never the enemy. I was caught in a web I didn't choose, a web spun by those who promised a better future. I did what I had to do to survive." Survive. Layla's voice broke into bitter laughter, echoing off the cold concrete walls. "You call betraying everything I stood for survival. I trusted you, Darius. I believed you were here to help me unravel this conspiracy. Instead, you were one of its architects." Her eyes flashed with fury and hurt. "How could you be part of the very network that shattered my life?" The hooded figure observed the exchange with an impassive gaze, his presence an unyielding reminder that nothing was as it seemed. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us the most. And sometimes, the price of survival is the sacrifice of one's integrity." His words were like a slow poison, seeping into every corner of the room. Darius's face contorted in anguish as he struggled to find words that might bridge the growing chasm between them. "Layla, please," he pleaded, reaching out as if to touch her hand in a gesture of reconciliation. "I never meant for you to find out this way. Everything I did was under orders, under pressure from forces far beyond our control. I was forced into a corner, and I did what I thought was necessary at the time." Layla recoiled as if struck. "Necessary," she repeated, her voice rising in a mix of incredulity and pain. "Do you expect me to believe that you, the man I trusted, could be forced to betray every ounce of loyalty I had left? I spent years building a life based on honor and duty, and you—" Her voice broke as the weight of betrayal overwhelmed her. "You used me as a pawn in your game." The silence that followed was heavy and oppressive. The hooded figure's eyes softened momentarily, as if he too felt the sting of the revelation. "The truth is seldom simple," he murmured, almost to himself. "It is a tapestry of decisions, compromises, and sacrifices. But let it be known, when you choose to hide behind a mask of righteousness, you sometimes become part of the very darkness you sought to escape." Darius's gaze fell to the floor. "I try to protect you," he said quietly, his voice thick with regret. "When I became involved with your former organization, I believed I could steer it towards justice from the inside. I thought that by gaining their trust, I could eventually dismantle the corruption from within. I never intended to hurt you, Layla. I never intended for you to suffer as you have." Layla's eyes glistened with tears of anger and despair as she looked up at him. "Your intentions don't erase the consequences, Darius," she whispered, her tone raw with emotion. "Every lie, every secret meeting, they cut deep. I trusted you with everything I had left after my world was torn apart. And now, I see that trust was misplaced." The hurt in her voice was palpable, each word laced with the sorrow of lost innocence. "You weren't just part of their scheme," she continued, her tone rising with a mixture of bitterness and sorrow. "You were the one who ensured that I was cast aside. You were complicit in the betrayal that forced me to leave behind the life I once fought so hard to change." Darius's eyes filled with tears, And for a long moment, he remained silent, his internal conflict playing out in the furrows of his brow. "Layla, I can't change the past," he said at last, his voice breaking. "But I can tell you that every day since then, I have lived with the regret of that choice. I was trapped, and I made choices that I believed were the only way to keep us both safe from a greater evil." His words were desperate, as if he were trying to convince himself even as he pleaded with her. The air between them crackled with the intensity of their emotions. The hooded figure stepped back into the shadows, his presence now a silent witness to the unraveling of a bond once thought unbreakable. "The road to redemption is steep," he intoned softly, his words a final reminder that the truth, once revealed, cannot be unseen. And sometimes the hardest truth to bear is the one about the people we love. Layla's mind whirled as she tried to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the man the evidence painted before her. Every memory, every shared moment of quiet understanding, every word spoken in confidence, was now tainted by the stain of betrayal. "How do I know any of it is true?" she demanded, her voice trembling between anger and despair. "How do I know that this isn't just another lie, another twist in your elaborate game?" Darius looked up, his eyes pleading. "Layla, I'm not asking for your forgiveness," he said, his tone hollow with pain. "I only want you to understand that I never wished to be your enemy. I was forced into choices that, in hindsight, have cost me everything I hold dear, including your trust." His voice cracked as he reached out once more, but this time Layla stepped back, her expression one of hard resolve. A long, agonizing silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of dripping water and the soft rustling of old paper in the envelope. Layla's heart ached with the realization that everything she believed in had been built on fragile foundations. "I need time," she said at last, her voice barely audible. "Time to understand what this means. For me. For us. I can't just forget that you were part of it all." Darius's face crumpled in despair, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and desperate hope. "Layla, please," he whispered, his tone imploring. "I know I've hurt you beyond measure, and I can't undo the past. But if you let me, I want to make it right. I want to expose the true culprits, to dismantle the network that forced our hands. I want to help you reclaim the truth you deserve." But Layla's gaze was distant, her thoughts swirling with memories of betrayal and loss. "I trusted you with everything," she repeated bitterly, her voice a broken echo in the cold, empty room. "And now every lie you told me, every secret you kept, it's as if the man I thought I knew never existed." Tears welled in her eyes as she turned away, unable to face the man who had been both her confidant and her betrayer. Outside, the rain began to fall in earnest once again, the rhythmic pattern on the corrugated metal of the warehouse mingling with the sound of shattered trust. The hooded figure lingered in the doorway, watching as the fragile bond between Layla and Darius splintered irreparably. His presence, once a herald of hidden truths, now underscored the painful reality that the path to redemption was paved with sacrifices too steep to bear. In the ensuing silence, Layla gathered the envelope with trembling hands and stepped toward the cold, unforgiving light of the exit. Each step was laden with the weight of loss, the burden of a past that refused to remain buried. Behind her, Darius's desperate calls faded into the distance, mingling with the sound of rain and regret. The truth had been laid bare, raw, unfiltered, and merciless, and with it came a rift that might never be healed. As the door closed softly behind her, sealing her fate in the wake of betrayal, Layla knew that the life she once believed in was gone forever. The intricate web of lies had ensnared her in ways she could no longer deny, and the man she had trusted to help her unravel it now stood as a painful reminder of all that had been lost. In that moment, beneath the relentless downpour and indifferent gaze of the night, Layla realized that the true cost of betrayal was not measured in mere secrets or broken promises. It was etched in the scars left behind on a shattered heart. And so, with the evidence of a hidden truth burning in her mind, Layla stepped out into the storm, determined to forge a new path from the wreckage of a past marred by deception. The rift between her and Darius was vast and unyielding, a chasm carved by choices made in darkness and illuminated by the harsh light of a truth that refused to be hidden any longer. The night had deepened into a restless gloom as Layla moved cautiously through the deserted streets. The rain had subsided into a persistent mist that blurred the neon lights and cast eerie shadows along the alleyways. Ever since the revelations in that cold, damp warehouse, every step she took felt laden with foreboding. The evidence, the damning documents implicating Darius, still pulsed in her mind like a wound that refused to heal. Yet, even as she struggled with the betrayal that had shattered her trust, a more sinister tension began to build around her. It was as though the very fabric of her world was unraveling, thread by fragile thread. Layla's thoughts raced with questions. How deep did this conspiracy truly run? Who were the true adversaries pulling the strings? And most painfully, how was she supposed to reconcile a man she once trusted with the stark reality of his complicity? Each step toward her modest, safe house was a step into uncertainty. The city, usually familiar and even comforting in its quiet corners, now felt like a labyrinth of hidden dangers and secret watchers. As she neared a run-down building on the edge of a forgotten quarter, her phone buzzed with a new message. The screen lit up with a single line that made her blood run cold. "Your next move is being watched. Trust no one." The message was unsigned, yet its tone was unmistakably urgent. Layla's fingers trembled slightly as she typed a quick reply, though she knew that every digital trace could be a clue for those determined to control her destiny. With the message hanging heavily in her mind, she stepped inside the building, a place she had chosen for its anonymity and the cover it provided from prying eyes. Inside, the space was dimly lit by a single, weak lamp. The peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards whispered of decades of neglect. Layla sank onto an old wooden chair, her mind churning with possibilities. Just yesterday, she had believed that the betrayal she had discovered, the damning proof linking Darius to the corruption that had once destroyed her life, was the worst of it. But now, with that ominous message, she sensed that the conspiracy was far from over. A second betrayal was brewing, one that would shake the very foundation of everything she thought she knew. Her solitude was abruptly interrupted by a soft knock at the door. With cautious urgency, Layla rose and crept toward it, peeking through the peephole. The face that stared back was unexpected. An old friend from her past, Malik, whose warm smile and steadfast loyalty had once been her anchor in turbulent times. His eyes, usually filled with reassuring light, now held an unreadable glint. Reluctantly, she unlatched the door and opened it just a crack. "Layla," Malik said softly, his voice carrying both concern and a hint of urgency. "I didn't expect to see you here at this hour. We need to talk." His unexpected appearance stirred a mix of relief and caution within her. Malik had been one of the few people from her former life whom she had allowed to stay close, a remnant of a time when trust had been easier, before the scars of betrayal had hardened her heart. Yet even as she welcomed his presence, an instinctive wariness nagged at her. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let him pass. As Malik crossed the threshold, his eyes scanned the room quickly, as if checking for any signs that they might be under surveillance. Once inside, he closed the door gently and sat down on the faded couch across from her. "Layla, I've been trying to reach you," he began, lowering his voice. "There's been some troubling activity. I found something, information that I wasn't sure I should share until I confirmed it was safe to do so." Layla's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, Malik? What information?" He hesitated, then pulled out a small, encrypted drive from his jacket pocket. "I managed to recover this from a secure server that I accessed a few days ago. I believe it contains records that not only confirm what you discovered about Darius, but also reveal that the conspiracy goes much deeper. I wasn't expecting this. I thought my role in the old organization was behind me." His voice wavered with a mix of regret and fear. Layla's eyes locked onto the drive, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. She reached out, her hand trembling as she took it from him. "Show me," she whispered. In the small, cramped apartment that Malik had chosen as a temporary hideout, they sat together before a flickering laptop. Malik's skilled fingers worked quickly to decrypt the files, and soon a series of documents, emails, and audio recordings filled the screen. As Layla scrolled through the evidence, her heart pounded with a familiar mix of anger and disbelief. The files pointed to a vast network of corruption that stretched far beyond what she had ever imagined. Names, dates, financial transfers, they formed a tangled web that implicated several high-ranking officials within the airline, government insiders, and even international operatives. But it wasn't just the scale of the conspiracy that struck her. It was one document in particular. It was a transcript of a private conversation, recorded covertly, between none other than Malik and Mr. Kareem, the stern supervisor who had once given Layla orders without question. In the transcript, Malik spoke with an unsettling calm about coordinating discreet meetings, ensuring that sensitive information was leaked at just the right moment. The tone was conspiratorial, and the words were laced with the unmistakable smell of betrayal. Layla's breath hitched as she realized the magnitude of the twist. Malik, the friend she had trusted implicitly, was entangled in this corrupt network. His role, it seemed, wasn't that of an innocent bystander or a concerned former ally. It was that of a co-conspirator, working in tandem with Mr. Kareem to manipulate events from behind the scenes. The revelation stung like a betrayal all over again, deepening the wounds that had barely begun to heal. "Malik," she managed, her voice quivering with a mixture of sorrow and rage. "How could you be a part of this? I trusted you. I thought you left that world behind when I did." For a long moment, Malik's eyes flickered with conflicting emotions. He looked away, as if unable to meet her gaze. "Layla, it's not as simple as you think," he said finally, his tone heavy with regret. "I was forced into a position I never wanted, and I thought I could control it from the inside. I believed that by playing along, I could eventually bring the whole thing down, without hurting those I cared about. But I realize now that I've only added to your pain." Layla's mind reeled. The mounting challenges, the relentless betrayals, first Darius, now Malik, seemed almost too much to bear. The safe ground she had so desperately clung to was slipping away. "You betrayed me twice," she said bitterly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "First with Darius, and now you. Every person I trusted has become a link in this chain of lies." The room grew silent as Malik searched her face for a sign of forgiveness or understanding, but she could see only hurt and distrust. "I'm sorry," he repeated softly, "but there's more you need to know. This isn't just about personal betrayal, it's about survival. The people behind all of this, the ones orchestrating every move, will stop at nothing to maintain their control. I was trying to protect you by staying close, thinking I could steer things in a direction that would keep you safe." Layla's anger surged, mingling with a deep sense of disillusionment. "Protect me? By feeding me lies and hiding behind your own agenda. I was already warned not to trust anyone, and now you prove that the warning was real." She pushed herself away from the table, rising to pace in the cramped room. Each step was heavy with the weight of betrayal, and each echo on the bare floor seemed to hammer home the relentless cruelty of her fate. Outside, the distant hum of the city continued unabated, oblivious to the personal storm raging inside the room. Layla's mind was a whirl with conflicting thoughts. The mounting challenges were now more than the weight of a vast conspiracy. They were deeply personal. The faces of those she had trusted were now blurred, merging into a single, haunting specter of deceit. Every friend, every ally, every former mentor seemed tainted by the same corrupt influence. The safe path she had once believed in was a lie, and every step forward threatened to plunge her deeper into darkness. A sudden knock at the door startled them both. Malik exchanged a wary glance with Layla before rising to answer it. We opened the door. A tall, sharply dressed man stood there, his eyes cool and calculating. He introduced himself as Mr. Zane, an emissary sent by an unknown benefactor who claimed to have information crucial to dismantling the entire network. His presence was imposing, and his voice carried the authority of someone used to commanding absolute attention. "Miss Layla, I believe we have a mutual interest in exposing the corruption that has plagued our lives," Mr. Zane said, his tone smooth and persuasive. "I understand you have suffered greatly, and I am here to offer assistance. But know this: the path ahead will demand sacrifices that you might not yet be prepared to make." Layla regarded him warily. She had learned to be cautious of strangers bearing promises of help. "And why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice edged with bitterness. Mr. Zane's gaze was unwavering. "Because unlike the others, I have nothing to gain from your suffering except for the hope of a future free from these lies. I have been gathering intelligence on this network for years, and I believe that together we can dismantle it. But first, you must be ready to face the truth, however painful it may be." The room fell into silence as the weight of his words sank in. Malik looked torn, caught between his previous betrayals and the possibility of redemption. Layla, however, felt only a deepening sense of isolation. Every new piece of information, every unexpected adversary, seemed to force her to confront the unbearable reality that no one was truly on her side. The unrelenting pressure of mounting challenges and betrayals was beginning to close in around her like a tightening noose. "I don't know if I can do this," Layla murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "Every time I think I've seen the worst, another face of betrayal emerges. How am I supposed to rebuild trust when it seems to be stolen away from me at every turn?" Mr. Zane stepped forward, his expression softening ever so slightly. "You must remember, Miss Layla, that strength is often forged in the crucible of adversity. The betrayals you have endured do not diminish your worth. They highlight your resilience. You have the power to change the course of this narrative, but you must be willing to confront every painful truth, no matter how bitter." Layla's eyes glistened with a mixture of despair and determination. The journey ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, and the promise of redemption was intertwined with the ever-present threat of further betrayal. "Then tell me," she said, her voice steadying despite the tremor of emotion beneath it, "what must I do?" Mr. Zane's answer was both simple and profound. "You must gather every piece of evidence, every shard of truth, and expose those who orchestrate these deceptions. But be warned, the deeper you go, the more dangerous it becomes. The network will do everything in its power to silence you, even if it means turning those closest to you against you once more." At that moment, as if to punctuate his warning, a distant siren wailed through the night. The sound seemed to echo off the cold walls of the building, a reminder that time was running out. Malik's face, already etched with regret, now contorted with a blend of fear and resolve. "I have one more confession," he said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. "I was the one who sent you that last message, the one warning you that you couldn't trust anyone. I hoped that by shocking you, I could force you to see the truth. But I realize now that my actions may have only deepened the wound." Layla's heart clenched at his words. The betrayal of a friend, repeated in layers, was almost too much to bear. Yet beneath the hurt was a spark of defiance. "I will not let your treachery or anyone else's define me," she declared, her voice rising in quiet determination. "I will use every piece of this broken puzzle to forge a new path, one where the truth is not buried under deceit." Mr. Zane inclined his head in approval. "That is the spirit," he said. "But know that the next step may be the most dangerous of all. You must confront those who have manipulated you from the start, even if it means facing the ghosts of your past." As the night stretched on, Layla sat alone with her thoughts. The mounting challenges, the unexpected adversaries, and the second betrayal had conspired to push her to the brink. Yet within that crucible of despair, a quiet resolve began to take shape. She knew that the road ahead would be perilous, and that every step forward could unearth more painful truths. But she also knew that if she was to reclaim her life and expose the corruption that had tore her world apart, she had no choice but to move forward, no matter how treacherous the journey might be. In the cold light of the early hours, as the mist slowly lifted to reveal the first hints of dawn, Layla made a silent vow. She would gather the remnants of her shattered trust, piece together the fragments of evidence, and confront every enemy, both seen and unseen. Even if the ones she once held dear turned out to be conspirators, she would forge her own destiny from the ruins of their deceit. With renewed determination, she gathered the encrypted drive, the printed documents, and the lingering fragments of her once steadfast beliefs. Every betrayal had left its mark, but each scar was also a reminder of the strength that had carried her this far. The network of lies was vast, but so was her resolve to expose it. The path ahead was uncertain, but as the light of a new day broke over the horizon, Layla stepped into it with eyes unclouded by the past and a heart set on reclaiming the truth. The unraveling had begun in earnest, a process marked by mounting challenges and unforeseen adversaries. And though each betrayal cut deeper than the last, Layla knew that within her lay the power to transform pain into a weapon against those who had betrayed her trust. The night had given way to the promise of dawn, and with it, the first fragile rays of hope. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the night air thick with a heavy stillness that felt like the calm before a storm. Layla stood in the center of an abandoned hangar on the outskirts of the city, her heart pounding in her chest. Every step she had taken over the past days, the painful betrayals, the mounting challenges, the twists that had shattered her trust, had led her to this moment. Before her, the conspiracies that had haunted her were ready to be unmasked. In the dim light filtering through broken windows, every shadow seemed to whisper secrets, every rusted beam a silent witness to the truths about to be revealed. Across the vast, empty space, Darius emerged from the darkness. His face, usually composed with an air of unyielding confidence, now was etched with conflict and regret. He stepped forward slowly, his eyes locked on Layla, as if trying to gauge whether there was any hope left for reconciliation. Behind him, Malik stood in a corner, his expression torn between remorse and determination, while Mr. Zane, calm and measured, surveyed the scene from a raised platform that overlooked the floor. They all knew that tonight would decide not only the fate of a dangerous network of corruption, but also the destiny of the bonds that once held them together. Layla's voice broke the silence, steady but laced with hurt. "Darius, Malik, I want the truth, everything. I have pieces of evidence, recordings, encrypted files. I need to know why you betrayed me, why you helped build this web of lies." Her words echoed off the cold metal walls, mingling with the distant sound of dripping water. Darius took a shuddering breath. "Layla, I never meant to hurt you," he began, his voice thick with remorse. "I was trapped by forces greater than myself. Every decision I made, I thought I was protecting you and trying to bring down the corruption from the inside. But in doing so, I lost my way, and I lost you." His eyes searched hers for forgiveness, but Layla could see that the pain in his gaze was genuine, even if his actions had cut her deeply. Before Layla could respond, Malik's voice, quiet yet trembling, interjected. "I'm sorry, Layla. I tried to warn you, to force you to see that nothing was as it seemed. I never intended to be part of this betrayal. I believed I could control the situation, that I could fix it from within. But I see now that my choices only made everything worse." His words faltered as he looked down, guilt and sorrow mingling in his expression. Mr. Zane, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "Enough of apologies," he said calmly, his voice carrying over the hush of the night. "We are here because the time has come for all truths to be laid bare. The network we have been entangled in, the corruption that has manipulated and ruined so many lives, ends tonight." His gaze swept the room, as if daring anyone to challenge him. Layla felt a surge of anger mixed with a profound sense of loss. You speak of ending it, she said, her voice rising with emotion. But at what cost? How many lives have been shattered by your actions? How many people have you sacrificed in the name of survival? I trusted you with my life, and every time I looked for hope, I found betrayal instead. Her words hung in the air, charged with raw emotion. The tension in the room grew thick, almost suffocating, as if the very walls were closing in to listen. Darius's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he took a tentative step closer. Layla, believe me when I say I never wanted this outcome. I thought I could dismantle the system from the inside without causing more pain. I was wrong. I see that now. His voice cracked, and for a moment, his defiance gave way to vulnerability. Malik, stepping forward with trembling resolve, added, I tried to warn you, Layla. I thought that by revealing only parts of the truth, I could protect you from the full horror of it. But secrets have a way of coming out. And now, every piece of evidence we have points to a far darker reality than any of us imagined. He held out a small flash drive, the weight of its contents almost palpable in the silence. Mr. Zane nodded. There is more, he said quietly. I have been gathering intelligence on this network for years. The corruption runs deeper than we suspected. It's not just about individual betrayals. It's about an entire system that has manipulated us all for its own gain. Every order, every threat, every lie, all of it was designed to keep you under control. His voice was low and deliberate, and as he spoke, the truth began to crystallize in the minds of everyone present. Layla's eyes narrowed, a mixture of fury and determination igniting within her. Then show me the proof, she demanded. I want to see every secret, every piece of evidence that proves you were part of this. I want to understand why you thought betrayal was the only way to survive. Her words were both a challenge and a plea, a desperate need to understand the person she once loved and to see justice done. Mr. Zane motioned to a projector that had been set up in one corner of the hangar. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of documents, audio recordings, and video clips. As the evidence unfolded before them, every secret was laid bare. The screen showed intimate meetings, confidential communications between high-ranking officials, and even recorded confessions that implicated powerful individuals in the corruption. One recording, in particular, caught Layla's attention, a conversation in which Darius and Malik discussed plans to manipulate events in order to protect a hidden agenda. The raw, unedited voices on the recording revealed moments of desperation, fear, and a resigned acceptance of the sacrifices they had made. Layla's hands trembled as she absorbed every detail. The weight of the evidence was crushing, yet it also stirred something within her, a determination to not let the darkness win. This is all true, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the projector. Every lie, every betrayal, it's all here. Darius's face fell as he watched the screen. His eyes, once full of calculated resolve, now betrayed the deep anguish of a man caught in a web of his own making. I never wanted it to come to this, he murmured, almost to himself. I thought I could fix everything from the inside, that I could be the one to bring down the system without hurting you. His words were heavy with regret. Layla stepped forward, her gaze shifting between the screen and the man she once believed in. But you did hurt me, she said, her voice rising with pain. Every decision you made, every secret you kept, it wasn't just about the system. It was about you, about your survival, at the expense of my trust, my life. I have nothing left to lose, Darius. Not now. Her tone was fierce, a declaration of independence forged in the crucible of betrayal. The air crackled with tension as the evidence continued to roll out. Names, dates, transactions, all painting a grim picture of a network that had manipulated not only them, but countless others. Mr. Zane's calm voice resumed. This is the moment when you decide what you stand for. Do you let the past define you, or do you take control of your destiny and fight back against the corruption that has enslaved us all? Layla's eyes burned with determination as she looked around at the men who had once been her allies. I stand for truth, she said firmly. I stand for those who have been betrayed by this system, who have been left in the dark by those who promised to protect them. Her voice, though laden with sorrow, was also strong, resonating with a sense of purpose that had been buried under layers of deception. Darius's voice trembled as he spoke. "I want to help you, Layla. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but if there is any chance to make things right, I will do whatever it takes." His plea was desperate, yet it carried the sincerity of a man who had finally seen the true cost of his actions. For a long, agonizing moment, Layla considered his words. The evidence on the screen, the pain of every betrayal, and the weight of her own shattered trust all swirled within her. Finally, she took a deep breath and stepped toward him. "Darius, I don't know if I can ever trust you again," she said softly, "but we are at a crossroads. If we are to bring down this network, if we are to expose the truth and help those who have suffered, then I need you to commit to it completely. No more secrets, no more half-truths. We either stand together or we continue down separate, destructive paths." His eyes shone with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "I promise," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I promise that from now on, I will be completely honest, no matter how painful it is. I want to help you bring justice to those who have been wronged." His words were earnest, and for a moment, Layla saw a glimmer of the man she once knew. Meanwhile, Malik hung his head, the weight of his betrayal evident in every line of his face. "Layla," he said softly, "I know I have caused you immeasurable pain. I made choices that I believed were necessary at the time, but I see now how wrong I was. I stand ready to do whatever it takes to help mend this broken trust, even if it means sacrificing what little I have left." His voice was thick with remorse, and the sincerity in his tone was undeniable. Mr. Zane observed the emotional exchange, his gaze steady as he addressed the group. "This is the turning point," he said. "Tonight, all of you must decide whether you will be pawns in this corrupt game or if you will rise up and take control of your destinies. The evidence is laid bare. The network is powerful, but it is not invincible. With unity, determination, and truth, we can dismantle it piece by piece." As the projector's light flickered across their determined faces, Layla felt the storm within her settle into a cold, hard resolve. Every betrayal, every lie, had led to this moment of clarity. "We have a chance," she said, her voice firm. "We can expose the corruption, dismantle the system, and bring justice to those who have suffered. But will require all of us to work together, to put aside our pain and our doubts, and to fight for a future where truth prevails." Her words rang out in the silence of the abandoned hangar, a battle cry that seemed to vibrate against the cold metal and concrete. Darius and Malik nodded slowly, their expressions a mixture of regret and newfound determination. Even Mr. Zane's stoic face softened ever so slightly, acknowledging the gravity of what lay ahead. In that charged moment, the tension of years of betrayal and secrecy erupted into a palpable energy. The conspirators who had once operated from the shadows would soon face the light of truth, and the network built on lies would begin to crumble under the force of a united stand. Layla stepped back, allowing herself a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought her here, the pain, the loss, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Every tear, every whispered promise of redemption, had led to this climactic confrontation. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting long, hopeful shadows across the hangar floor, Layla knew that this was not the end, but a new beginning. The truths were out in the open. The betrayals had been laid bare, and now, together, they would take the final step toward reclaiming their lives from the clutches of corruption. The high stakes of this confrontation had forced each of them to confront their own demons, and in doing so, they found the strength to stand together. With a steady voice that belied the turmoil inside, Layla declared, "Tonight we begin the process of healing, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who has suffered under this tyranny. We will expose every lie, every hidden agenda, and we will restore what has been lost. Let this be the night when the light of truth finally banishes the darkness." The echo of her words filled the vast space, and as they prepared to move forward with their plan, Layla felt a sense of catharsis washing over her. The climactic confrontation had not only shattered the web of lies, but had also forged a path toward redemption and renewal. In that moment, the pain of betrayal transformed into a powerful resolve, a determination to build a future defined by honesty, unity, and hope. As the dawn broke fully and the hangar filled with the soft glow of a new day, the group dispersed to begin their work. Layla stayed for a moment longer, looking at the fading images on the projector, each one a testament to the horrors of the past and the promise of a better tomorrow. With tears still glistening in her eyes, she whispered a final vow to herself, that no matter how deep the darkness, the truth would always be the beacon that guided her home. And so, with hearts heavy yet resolute, they stepped out into the new light, ready to confront the remaining adversaries, to piece together the shattered remnants of trust, and to reclaim a future built not on deception, but on the unwavering power of truth and love. Layla stepped out into the cool light of early morning, leaving behind the cold echoes of the hangar and the memories of that long, painful night. The confrontation, with all its raw emotion and unvarnished truths, had finally shattered the network of lies that had kept her captive for so long. Yet now, in the stillness of a new day, she was left with a heavy but necessary burden, the weight of her choices and the responsibility to rebuild a life from the ruins of betrayal. She wandered slowly down a deserted street, her footsteps soft on the damp pavement. The city was just waking up, its usual clamor reduced to a quiet murmur. In that fragile dawn, Layla found herself in a space where the past and the present collided. The images of Darius's tearful confession, Malik's anguished apologies, and Mr. Zane's unwavering determination all swirled within her mind. Every whispered promise of redemption mingled with the sting of betrayal, and every regret was countered by a spark of resolve. At a small park on the edge of the city, where old trees bowed under the weight of time and the air smelled of dew and possibility, Layla finally sat on a weathered bench. Here, amidst the muted chirps of birds and the distant hum of early traffic, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. It was here that she first began to understand that the truth, painful as it was, had freed her from a life built on secrets. The betrayal of those she once trusted had severed the bonds that tied her to a past she no longer wished to embrace. Now, the path ahead, though uncertain, promised a chance for renewal. Her mind drifted back to the night's events. The relentless accusations, the tearful voices, and the staggering evidence that had laid bare the corruption not only in others, but within herself as well. Darius had tried desperately to explain his actions, pleading that he had been forced into impossible choices by a system designed to crush dissent. Malik's remorse had been raw and painful, a reminder that sometimes survival meant making deals with the very monsters one hoped to defeat. And Mr. Zane, ever the calm orchestrator of truth, had urged them all to face the inevitable cost of their actions. In that moment of solitude, Layla realized that the resolution she sought was not simply the unmasking of deceit, but a deeper understanding of her own heart. The central conflict was not solely about the network of corruption that had dominated her life. It was about the fragile nature of trust and the capacity for forgiveness. She recalled how every lie, every secret whispered in the dark, had chipped away at the foundation of her beliefs. And yet, as painful as it was, that same destruction had cleared a space for something new, the possibility of rebuilding from scratch, on her own terms. A soft breeze stirred the leaves around the bench, and Layla closed her eyes to listen to nature's quiet wisdom. In that silence, she thought of the faces of those who had played pivotal roles in her journey. Darius's eyes, filled with regret and longing, had pleaded for another chance. Malik's face, marred by guilt, had shown that even those who falter can seek redemption. And even Mr. Zane, whose presence had been as enigmatic as it was vital, had spoken of sacrifice and hope. Though their actions had hurt her deeply, they were also part of a larger tapestry, a reminder that the line between friend and foe could blur when survival was at stake. In the days that followed, Layla began a slow process of healing. She returned to her small apartment on the outskirts of the city, a modest space that had once been her sanctuary, and started to sort through the remnants of her former life. There were letters, photographs, and a collection of documents that once symbolized her struggle against the oppressive system. Now, each piece was re-examined with fresh eyes. What had once been symbols of pain were slowly transforming into artifacts of strength and learning. She kept a journal, writing long, careful entries about her experiences and her emerging understanding of the world. The journal became a mirror for her soul, a place where the raw emotions of betrayal and loss were gently met with the promise of forgiveness and resilience. One cool afternoon, while sitting at a small table by a sunlit window, Layla reflected on the moral implications of her journey. She had spent so long fighting against a system that thrived on deception that she had nearly forgotten the simple truth that every human being carries a duality, a capacity for both great darkness and profound light. It was a realization that made her pause and question the very nature of morality. Were the choices of Darius and Malik entirely unforgivable, or were they simply the desperate acts of people caught in the clutches of an unyielding machine? And what of her own choices? Had she, in her quest for truth, become as hardened and unyielding as the system she despised? As she pondered these questions, a knock came at her door. Startled from her reverie, Layla hesitated before answering. When she opened the door, she found a familiar face, a local community worker named Sarah, who had once helped her during difficult times. Sarah's kind eyes and gentle smile conveyed a warmth that was rare in the aftermath of such strife. "I heard you've been through a lot," Sarah said softly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Sometimes, it takes facing the worst to see what really matters." Sarah's words resonated deeply with Layla. Over a cup of tea in the modest living room, they talked at length about the nature of forgiveness and the possibility of rebuilding trust after betrayal. Sarah reminded her that while the past could never be erased, it could serve as a guide for future choices, a lesson in understanding that even those who hurt us may be trying, in their own flawed ways, to find a path back to light. The conversation was quiet and unhurried, yet it carried the power to soothe wounds that had long festered in isolation. In the weeks that followed, Layla took small steps toward reconciliation with her own fragmented identity. She reached out to a few people from her past, initiating cautious conversations and tentative apologies. There was no grand ceremony of forgiveness, only quiet moments of honesty, where words were spoken with trembling sincerity and eyes met without pretense. Darius, having learned much from his own suffering, wrote to her from a distant city, sharing his ongoing struggles to atone for his missteps. His letters were filled with remorse, yet also with hope that the truth, however painful, might eventually pave the way for healing. Malik, too, made a humble attempt at reconnecting. He volunteered at local community centers, working tirelessly to support those who had been victimized by the same corruption that had ensnared them all. His efforts were not a way to erase the past, but rather a way to honor the lessons he had learned through betrayal. Through these interactions, Layla slowly came to understand that the resolution of her conflict was not found in complete erasure of pain, but in the acceptance of it as part of her story. The moral of her journey was complex and layered. It was a lesson in the fragility of trust and the inherent need for human connection, even in the face of overwhelming deceit. She learned that forgiveness did not mean forgetting the past. Rather, it meant acknowledging the hurt and choosing to move forward, not as a victim circumstance, but as a survivor who had gained wisdom through suffering. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows over the city, Layla stood on a quiet balcony looking out over the lights of a neighborhood slowly coming to life. The memories of betrayal were still there, etched into her heart like scars, but they had lost their power to define her entirely. In their place grew a gentle resolve to honor the truth by living authentically, to stand for those who could not speak for themselves, and to find beauty even in the brokenness of life. In that moment of reflection, Layla understood that every choice carried a moral weight, and that sometimes the hardest decisions were the ones that led to the greatest personal growth. The conflict she had endured was not a battle between good and evil in the simplest sense, but a struggle within every human soul, an internal war between the desire for justice and the need for compassion, between the pull of retribution and the liberating power of forgiveness. As the stars began to twinkle in the vast, dark sky above, Layla whispered a promise to herself, a vow to keep seeking the truth and to use her hard-won insights to guide others who might be lost in their own webs of deceit. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but she no longer feared the darkness. Instead, she embraced it as a necessary backdrop against which the light of truth shone all the brighter. In time, the wounds would heal, and the scars would serve as reminders of the strength it took to overcome betrayal. The moral reflection that had emerged from her ordeal was clear. While human beings are capable of deep treachery, they are also capable of profound redemption. Every act of deceit had been met with the potential for forgiveness, every betrayal with the possibility of reconciliation. And in that delicate balance lay the hope for a better, more honest future. Standing there, in the soft glow of the night, Layla felt a sense of calm that she had not known in years. The central conflict had been resolved not by the force of retribution, but by the quiet power of understanding and acceptance. The network of lies had been dismantled piece by piece, and though the memory of its pain would linger, it no longer held her captive. She had learned that the path to freedom was paved with honesty, and that, even in a world shadowed by betrayal, every human heart had the capacity to choose love over hate. In the gentle embrace of that quiet evening, Layla vowed to carry forward the lessons of her journey. She would work to expose corruption wherever it lay hidden, not out of a thirst for vengeance, but as a commitment to a world where truth and compassion reigned. And as she turned away from the balcony, stepping back into her modest home with its familiar, comforting clutter, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the knowledge that even the deepest wounds could eventually give way to the healing light of forgiveness and hope. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.